Welcome back to the Sounds Like Freedom podcast. I'm your host, Deborah Henne, and I'm here with returning guest Mark Stouffer, who is an engineer who lives with his family in Columbus, Ohio. He was born in 1960 and grew up loving sports. After college, he was found by God. Mark has a passion for the Bible, which he has been studying and teaching for nearly 40 years. He's been to Israel and has a great respect for the Jewish people. Welcome back, Mark.
Oh, thank you. Good to be back, Debbie.
Now, we had you on earlier. We talked quite a bit about your respect for the Jewish people, and New Covenant, Old Covenant, and things like that. Can you tell us more about your journey? Because you have another book out, correct?
Yes.
Tell us about the inspiration for that project.
Yeah. Well, actually, their books are in a series, and there's going to be two more. I'm writing the other ones right now, but yeah. I believe the whole series is God's idea, and it's based on John 5:39, where Jesus was speaking to the religious leaders, and he said, "You guys." It's a very interesting verse. He said, "You guys search the scriptures," which today we call the Old Testament, and Jewish people call that the Tanakh today. But then he just said the scriptures, and he said to find out seeking salvation. And then he said, but these scriptures speak, they're about me. So in this series, I examine different elements of the Old Testament to see if is that true? Is it really all about Jesus? And in the second book, I get into Messianic prophecy, which there's a lot of prophecy in the Old Testament, and a big subset of it is the Messianic prophecy. So I examine them, and we look at them, and did they predict Jesus? Is that true? So that's the subject of the book, and it's been doing very well. Came out in the spring, and it's been doing really well. And of course, prophecy is a popular subject today.
Yeah. Well, all prophecy should really point to Jesus, right? And Old Testament is, of course, pointing toward Jesus in the future, and New Testament, the prophetic movement should really be pointing back to God's heart, and which is always love and Jesus, redemption and freedom. And I think that's biblical too. But can you tell us a little bit about the book? And like, for example, I've been, working with some people who are not Christians, and they're like, Jesus was sent by God. He was pure, sure, but he's not the Son of God. Now, Messianic prophecies clearly say, in my opinion, he is the Son of God. Can you kind of talk to that a little bit? And does your book address that?
Yeah. I'm trying to think of prophecies about that, but let me think on that a little bit. But one of the things that I found interesting was in the book of Daniel, where in Daniel 6, if you read that, is a story which is really typically a children's story, where Daniel's thrown in the lion's den, and of course we kind of mess it up because we put these cute animals in there, and Daniel's in there like they're sheep or something, and he was being executed. Yeah. But God said, no, it's not his time to die. I'll decide that. Not there were people who were jealous of his success, and they tricked the Persian emperor into having him executed, and so the emperor didn't want to, but they forced his hand, and he put him in this lion's den. And then the next morning, the emperor loved him, and he came and said, and he knew Daniel talked about God all the time, and he knew that Daniel had this incredible faith, and he went, and he thought maybe somehow Daniel might be alive, and he was. But anyway, if you read through chapter 6 in Daniel, all of a sudden as a Christian, you'll realize all these details match up perfectly with the story of Jesus's resurrection. In that case, Mary and Peter and John, they didn't think Jesus was alive, but they just loved him so much. They went to the tomb just to see what was happening a couple of days later. and then the boulder that was in front of the cave was rolled away. You know, we all know that story. If you go to Daniel 6, it's the same details. There was a boulder placed over the mouth of the lion's den, and there was a seal, just like the Roman Pontius Pilate had a seal put over that opening, so that no one, you know, with the wax and his imprint, so that no one would dare touch it. They did, the Persian emperor did the same thing, and there was a seal placed over the boulder that was over the opening. And so all these details, as you read it, you're like, oh my gosh, that's exactly what they did with Jesus. And you realize that this wasn't a prophecy, but it was a foreshadowing of the resurrection. And so all the details line up. And in Jesus' case, he came out resurrected. In Daniel's case, he came out alive. So that's just one example. But the Son of God, yeah, that's in there. But I'm not coming to my mind right now where it said that it would be God who would come to earth. But a lot of things like that are so amazing, you know.
And I think that, you know, in the story of Jesus's trial, and he says, the Son of Man coming on the clouds, and that phrase just made the religious leaders and the Sanhedrin so upset. They're blasphemy and all this stuff. And I remember, as a Western Christian, I had never really dug into that in particular, and I was just like, I don't get it. Like why did that phrase in particular cause such a reaction with them? And then when I dug into it, I realized he was referencing Daniel's prophecy, and it was that he was God. And if you read the prophecy in Daniel, is so shaken, and he had to have an angel come minister to him, because he was like, how could this possibly be? How could God ever be a human? And Jesus referenced that in his trial, and they couldn't tolerate the blasphemy, but so I think even there, is clear connection between Daniel and Jesus and the deity of God and the deity of Jesus.
Yes, that's great. You're right. You're right. That, I believe that's from Daniel 7. You know, and in I think it's I forget which chapter, but Daniel sees, he says, a man standing on the water. When he's asked to receive understanding, and some angels come and to give him prophecy, and in that moment he sees a man standing on the water, and that's really not explained, but that's also probably a foreshadowing of Jesus walking on the water. So yeah, I love the book of Daniel.
Yes, powerful and truths, and I think prophecy that hasn't even been fulfilled yet.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it's exciting to see, the prophecies being fulfilled, and then even knowing that they're still yet to be fulfilled. But yeah. So any other ones that you can kind of pull out from your book and kind of highlight for us today?
Yeah. There's one that everybody knows, and is from Zechariah 9:9, and that's where I should read that verse, but it's where it's a prophecy of Jesus riding down the Mount of Olives on a donkey. And I'm gonna go ahead and read that. But there's also in Zechariah, there's a great prophecy, chapter 11, verse 6. And I'll read that too. And remember, and your audience won't remember, but you will, that my book is written to Jewish people. Primarily, it's written to Christians that don't know a lot about the Old Testament, but it's mainly written to Jewish people who are willing to consider if Jesus is the fulfillment of the Old Testament. So, all right, here we go. So Zechariah 9:9 says, "Rejoice greatly, O daughter of Zion. Shout in triumph, O daughter of Jerusalem. Behold, your king is coming to you. He is just and endowed with salvation, humble and mounted on a donkey, even on a colt, the foal of a donkey. So it just says that. And, and then when Jesus rode down the Mount of Olives, it's like, well, he fulfilled it. He rode down on a donkey colt, not even a donkey, but a baby donkey. And everybody will say in church, you've probably heard this, well, now, yes, Jesus fulfilled that, but really anybody could do that. Anybody could ride a donkey into the gates of Jerusalem, and he did it. So it's not really evidence because anyone could do that. But what I realized, though, is if you look a little deeper, is that it kind of is evidence, because it's saying that it's your king that's riding on a donkey, and it's saying that he's endowed with salvation. So kings aren't endowed with salvation, right? Human kings, and nor do they ride donkeys. We think of the movie Gladiator or any of the Hollywood movies going back to the 50s about, the Romans and not just the Romans, but they're a good example. But kings ride in on a magnificent horse, pure white horse, or in a gold chariot, and people are throwing rose petals in front of them. And this is the way kings enter capital cities. But so what is this? So yes, anyone could ride a donkey, but no king would ride a donkey. So what's being prophesied here isn't so much the act of riding a donkey, but it's the what it represents. So what's being described here is a special kind of a king the likes of which we've hardly ever seen in history. Someone like Mahatma Gandhi, like an Abraham Lincoln, that is humble to the point that they're not worried about their power or their great display of their power. They're actually leading for the sake of people. And so this is quite a prophecy, because there have been very few rulers like this in history. So Jesus qualifies on this account. So I just love that.
And I was looking up to confirm, but in the Old Testament, because Jesus was the fulfillment of the Davidic promise, right? That your throne will reign forever.
Yeah.
And when David passed and the rule went to Solomon and he was the appointed king, he didn't come on a horse. He came on a mule. So even that was an interesting correlation to me when I read into that and dug into that. I was like, oh wow. So it's really a very clear declaration that I am the fulfillment of this promise to David.
Yes. Yeah, that's very good. What book is that in?
I just closed it.
Was it like Samuel or something?
Yeah, something like that. Let me see if I can get it open real quick again here. That was in First Kings, I believe.
Okay.
But when I read that and I kind of made that connection too, I was like, well, that was another reason why he had to come on a donkey. He couldn't come on a horse, because it was a very clear statement of Messianic prophecy fulfillment.
Yeah. Yeah,
and
that's
I think
great.
people recognize that because they received him as the son of David.
Yeah.
Which is really awesome. So so can you tell us more about the inspiration? I know you talked about, you wanted to go to bring this message to the Jewish people who are willing to listen and to hear that maybe that Jesus is the fulfillment of prophecy. But I actually just this weekend had somebody ask me, well, how did you know God wanted you to write a book? Because I wrote a few years ago also. So can you speak to that? Because maybe there's somebody here who has something kind of stirring and they're like, I don't know if I should carve out the time to put into this effort, because it's a lot of effort, right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
who's written a book knows what kind of work it is.
Yeah.
It really has to be a call. And sometimes you're tested. I found that as I wrote my book and the other books that I haven't published yet, but have come after that, that there's a big testing in that. So can you just speak to that, the answering the call and then withstanding the testing?
Yeah, I'll tell you, I wrote a book 20 some years ago, and it wasn't that great. I did a lot of research and I was really interested by it, but I didn't write it that well, and it wasn't. In my feedback, thank God for my close friends that said, "Well, it's not written that well," which was kind of hard to hear, but was the truth. And so but I always loved studying, and I love studying the Bible, and I just wanted to write something. And I started on this big project to write to Muslims and Hindus about their scriptures and how contrast the Bible alongside their scriptures. And in the middle of it, I realized this was so much work, and I didn't mind doing it, but it was probably the Holy Spirit. The thought crossed my mind: does God want me to do this? Because this is a lot of work. And so I prayed and I said, please show me, God, if this is your will or mine. And within that next week, I was reading, I forget the reference, but about Elijah as he battled the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And I was reading that passage just for no reason. But as I read it, I saw how God very explicitly said, I want you to do this. And in my mind, and it must have been God, I was like, he did not call me to do what I'm doing. I did not get this. And so I knew, no, I'm doing this on my own. So I just stopped because it was too much work to waste on something that was just a project that wasn't God's project. So, so I would say to people that if you love to write and you're doing something on your own, that's okay. And there's value in it for you and hopefully for readers. But if it's a massive project, then, if do you have time for it? Which I did not. So fast forward 20 years, and I just enjoy reading the Bible, and I've been reading it, and I wanted to write something. And actually, I know some Muslim people, and I've read the Quran, and I've read what books written by Muslim scholars on the Quran, and again, going back to that idea from 20 years ago, I wanted to write to Muslim people, but in the middle of the night, I woke up and I had all these thoughts, some really neat metaphors and things to write, and I got up and I wrote it all down. It took like 45 minutes, and it was really good, and it was for Jewish people, though. It was from God. That's why it was really good. But it wasn't for Muslims. It was for Jewish people. And in that moment, I knew he wanted me to write something, but it wasn't what my idea was. He has a plan, and in his plan, he's like, Mark, that's great. You want to write something, but I'll give you something, and this is what I have for you to write. And so just as I read about Muslim, how they interpret the Bible, and I read and I learned and I started to write, and I started to lay out an outline of chapters, a table of contents. I just felt him with me the whole way, and I was learning and understanding, and I learned from my mistakes 20 years ago, and I try to write thinking, but not just writing, my understanding and my insights, but trying to write it well for the reader to be able to read. And I had a target audience in mind, a level of scholarship I had. The things that professors always tell you need a clear thesis statement. I had all of that, and they're right, and you need all that stuff. And so I enjoy it, and it is a lot of work, but I enjoy it. But that's my story. And I do encourage you, if God's calling on you to write something, definitely do it. And if he's not, there may still be value in it. So I don't want to discourage anyone.
Yeah, and if I can just pull out a couple of things that you said. Number one, you said that you had an idea, um, and God kind of took the seed of that idea and then he shaped it into what he really wanted, but you had, it sounds like you were definitely open to that. You were
Yeah.
willing to yield to that. You're willing to be patient for that. Because you said it was 20 years. Not a lot of us have the patience to wait 20 years with the seed
Yeah.
of something in our hearts. Um, so I just want to, even encourage our listeners, just because God put a seed in your heart, sometimes there's a timing to it. And as you said, there was a maturing to that and a developing to that. And sometimes there's like such a richness that God can cultivate in our hearts that he can then bring out of us to bless others by allowing him to do that maturing and developing and cultivating process in our own hearts. And as you said too, even just the skill. Writing is a skill. It can take years to learn how to write well. So it communicates clearly, effectively, and is engaging. And that too is a whole process. So, kind of allowing God to do his work in your heart, but also continuing to cultivate skills as you're patiently waiting for his time, and to listen to his way, and be willing to kind of adjust course. Um, but yeah, that sounds awesome. It's exciting work. Let me put your website up here. Can you tell people what they can find at your website, lovingkindnessofadonai.com?
Yeah, so there's a description of all the books and excerpts and picture of the covers and a little bio of me. And I have some videos on there from people that helped in some capacity with the books, being on the launching team or reviewing it. And I have three Christians, and they're all Christians, but I have three Gentile Christians and three Jewish Christians, and they tell their story in 5 to 10 minutes of how they came to faith. And so I have some videos, and then I have a page where you can contact me. Send me an email if you want to ask me or tell me anything. So um, there's some photos on the website, and those are all photos I took when I was in Israel. So that's what's there.
Awesome. So go to his website, lovingkindnessofadonai.com. Check out his books. We'll be looking for more books. I'm very excited as you continue to write and continue to release books, doing the work that God assigned to you. Check out the testimonies on there, and let's support what God is doing through his various ministers. And don't forget to swipe, tap, or click over to deborahhenne.com. Follow me on social on the X, Instagram, or Facebook at Deborah Henne Author. And let's not forget to tune into our thoughts to make sure they sound like Jesus's, so they sound like freedom.